Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Matt Bailey, a National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society here in Australia, representing the whole Scotch Malt Whisky Society membership. Love having you on for a live stream. It is Monday night. We're going live a little bit later tonight, but for good reason, because the guest I'm bringing in on this tonight's stream is actually 2 hours behind me at the moment, because we're always in front. Australia likes to be in front on everything, of course, but we're not really, but we like to think we are. He is 2 hours behind. In a different time zone, so it's actually a little bit earlier for him. He rushed home from work. He has a real job, unlike those of us who work in the whiskey industry who pretend to have jobs. So he has a real job where he doesn't talk about whiskey all day. He actually gets to do real work, and I actually get to come on here and bring him on because he is an old friend, an old colleague, and someone who knows the society very well. He and I have a very similar start at the society in some ways. We're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on certain other things, aspects of his whiskey career, if you like. I'm going to bring him in now. Please welcome to the stream our good friend, our writer, our influencer. I hate using that word, but you know what I mean. Here we go. Martin Eber from Time For Whisky. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you very much, mate. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to have you on.
Yeah, great to be here. And yeah, like you, not a fan of the word influencer at all. So that's just
I knew that one would make you cringe. Yeah, that's sort of a forbidden word, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually met someone today at a lunch who introduced herself as an influencer, and I thought, right, so we're not going to be friends.
Yeah, that's a good start, isn't it? Yeah, nice to meet you. This isn't going anywhere. So tell us, where exactly are you? Like, just because I gave a context of 2 hours behind, but tell everyone where you are. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So I'm in Hong Kong. Been here for touch over 7 years now. So I used to live in Sydney, and I moved here in 2014. So used to get back fairly often, and unfortunately haven't been back for close to 2 years now, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But great to stay in touch.
Yeah.
Like this.
It's actually funny you say that. It's 7 years has flown by, but at the same time, you've managed to stay very well connected to the whiskey scene in Australia. For someone who lives as far away as you do from it, like you actually have managed to stay really well connected. You can probably thank your colleague Hendy for that somewhat, but it's also you are still quite connected to the Australian whiskey scene. You see a lot of it going on as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely try to be. I think, the Australian whiskey scene is where I kind of started and got into whiskey in a big way. And, a lot of my, closest friends and closest whiskey mates are still back in Australia. So it's a great scene here. I can tell you more about that, but still very much like staying close to my whiskey mates. And, as you know, when I used to come back frequently and we'd have those catch-ups and those dram sessions, I miss them tremendously. But it's and certainly kind of running Time For Whisky and Hendy looking after the Australian side helps a lot, know with kind of what's going on in terms of the whiskey scene there.
And tell us, for those watching along at the Society, either now live with us or watching along later, tell us, what is Time For Whisky and where did it start? Where did you start with
it? Sure. So Time For Whisky is basically timeforwhisky.com. It's a website. I also run your Facebook page, Instagram page, Twitter, and all of that. But really, it's just a way for myself and Hendy there in Australia to share thoughts, news, ramblings about whiskey. How it all came about was about 2012. I was getting more and more into whiskey. I've kind of been into whiskey in a reasonably big way since about 2009, traveling a lot for work, going through duty-free shops in airports and seeing all these fancy-looking whiskey bottles, back when they were still pretty good in duty-free, and, buy one and buy two, and then, slowly ended up with a bit of a collection. And it was around 2012 that, a lot of whiskey bars and clubs started to pop up, a lot of tasting events, brands started to get bigger budgets, brand ambassadors were coming out, all of that sort of thing. And I was going along to these tastings, meeting people like James Bunton and some of the William Grant and Sons guys and that. And I just thought, this is a really fun scene. Like, these people are really great people. I'm really enjoying this. Obviously love the product. I want to get more involved, but I don't work in the F&B industry at all. There's no angle in that way. So what'll I do? I'll start a blog. And so I was just sitting there one night after work, and what do I call it? I thought, Time For Whisky. It was available, bought it, and then just started writing.
I think I remember one of my first encounters. Actually, this is really timely for our next part I'm going to go into here, so we can move this along. But I think one of the first proper, I guess, professional encounters I had with you was actually at an event with Dave Vitale presenting some Starwoods.
Yeah, at the Oak Barrel.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure we met before then, but we met a couple of times before then. But that was the first time I think I was properly introduced to you then, and that was sort of like one of those moments of like, hey, this is a cool sort of moment. And that was for the very first New World Project release that they ever did.
It was, and it sold out before the tasting finished because everyone kept running out of the room to go to the counter and put their order in. Which I saw
two categories of people that day, that evening. There were those who didn't even taste it and ran outside to grab them, and then there were those who sort of tasted it, and went, "Oop, I'm gonna get one of those," and then ran out of the room.
Yeah, and then I think the people that saw everyone else running out of the room and kind of didn't really know what was happening, but thought, "Oh, I better go and join them just in case." But,
I've been to a lot of events at the Oak Barrel, and I never seen that since. I'll be honest.
Yeah, right.
I've never seen that since where people are actually running out of the room for orders. I mean, that was pretty special, and I knew that they were onto something special at this distillery, which is why we're going to introduce Cask 148.1, which could be related to what we're just talking about. It could be from this distillery. We wouldn't know. I want to bring up some photos actually on screen just for us to all have a squiz at. The first photo is of course your face, but we'll go just to hide that for a second. That's taking up way too much screen real estate. There we go. Just bring up some of the history that we have, and I'll just go through some of this for us all to view along with. We've done some great events at this distillery. Now, I'm going to keep saying this distillery or Distillery 148 as much as possible, but I think we all know which distillery we're talking about. And we've done some great food and whiskey nights and even afternoons and Christmas parties and stuff at this distillery. These are just some photos from recent years. We've had a great contingent of members, our Victorian membership contingent coming along. It's been seriously a lot of fun. But I wanted to take a bit of a sort of a trip back through memory lane of some of the photos, the first photos that I remember taking upon my first visit to this distillery. And some of these photos were taken around, I'm going to say, these ones were taken around 2012, 2011 or 2012, these ones were. So, bordering on sort of 10 years ago. But there's this is their first name of this distillery. It says on a pallet, New World Whiskey Distillery. This is this was actually technically the second name, but I can't really say the first. And then above the door, and then there's the empty Essendon TAA warehouse. It was a flight hangar that they started this distillery in, and it was quite ambitious. It was quite a big flight hangar out in Essendon Fields. You remember Essendon Fields well, Martin, I'm sure.
I do, yeah. I was lucky enough to get a tour of the old site when I was actually heading back to the airport after a work trip once, and it was conveniently on the way, and David very kindly gave up some time to show me around and do all the fun things that you can kind of only do with whiskey distilleries when they're in those early phases, like drinking new make direct from the still with your cupped hands, underneath the flow.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually your photo, that one there. That's obviously a very early setup photo. There's not too many casks in the room, not too much junk laying around. It did get a bit cluttered in there when they outgrew the site, so that must be an early one for you as well. I can't see a date stamp on it, but
I think it was 2014 maybe, or 2014 I think.
Well, this photo was taken. I'm going to show this one. There's David on the right. I don't know who that gentleman is on the left, but that's the hangar before they even moved in. That's 2008. So that's Essendon pre, and then that's Essendon post, and then we move over to what was used to be above the door, another iteration of the name, if you like, Victoria Valley Distillery, which was actually a throwback to a distillery that did actually previously exist or trade under that name somewhat. So that was sort of like almost like a throwback title for them. It never stuck either. And then some of the fermenters. David doing his thing, talking through nerdy stats with whiskey nerds, which is part of it that he really didn't actually overly enjoy. This was part of the whiskey side of it that he wasn't really sort of like. Whiskey nerds were almost like a pain at the time, but I think he worked out that they needed the nerds to talk about the product. And then, of course, evil. Yes, a necessary evil. And then, of course, there's the original still, which was, I'm going to get my stats wrong here, but I think it was they bought that still off. No, that is a Peter Bailey still. Sorry, my mistake. That is a Peter Bailey still. And there's Peter Bailey doing the wiring on for the first distillery in Essendon, working away. And then I want to show a bit of where they are today. And That was last year. That was May last year. The construction of the second floor in their new site in Port Melbourne. It's a much bigger distillery now, and a much bigger site for them to grow into, which I think they're going to outgrow soon anyway. And there's the completed product of the new frilly stills, which are a fair bit larger on the second floor there of the new site. And that basket on the left there, which is purely for I guess they call that the tourist basket, so that people can see the spirit running. But I think it's a bit of fun anyway. Tell us some of the history of your personal history with this distillery as well. And I'd love to, viewers would love to hear it.
Yeah, so I first, funny you had the Victoria Valley sign, because I first heard about it from Chris Middleton at Ardbeg Day 2012, I think, which was if I'm not mistaken, it was the very first Ardbeg Day that they held in Australia.
Yeah,
and it was down at Milson's Point, and great event. It was the Ardbeg Day release. And I just, after the events and just chatting to other whiskey lovers who were there, and got chatting to this Chris guy who I'd never met before, and he's telling me about this distillery in Victoria called Victoria Valley Distillery, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Kind of never heard any more about it. And then the next year, 2013, I was at an event. I think it was a William Grant and Sons event, a Glenfiddich event, chatting to James and Mark Little, lovely guy. And they were telling me about this Melbourne whiskey that they tried called Starwood, and I kind of thought, I remember hearing about a Melbourne whiskey, but it wasn't called Starwood. And so I just and this was soon after I'd started the site. Actually, when I was researching the article, I went back and looked at the emails that I sent at that time, and back then the site was getting a whopping 50 visitors a day, which it's since gone on to get a few more than that. But it was early days of the site, and I just dropped them an email and said, look, I'm just a very new blogger who's just wanting to cover, whiskey in general, but especially the Australian whiskey scene. This looks really interesting. I'd love to know more. Can we have a chat? And got a reply from David, and he said, I'm going to be in Sydney in a couple of weeks. Why don't we catch up and go for a coffee? So we did at Shirt Bar, the original one, which is now a partner bar, the Shirt Bar, and had a chat, and he kind of talked me through the philosophy, and it seemed really interesting. It wasn't we're trying to replicate Scotch. I'm not sure everyone listening kind of knows the Starwood philosophy by now, but it's about making a distinctly Australian whiskey, and going for volume as well, and all those sort of things. And I just thought, this sounds like it's really got legs, and it also sounds really interesting. And he was kindly gave me a little sample to try, and it was tasty stuff. So I thought this sounds really good. And we just kind of stayed in touch. I wrote about it, and as they released other releases, I kind of wrote about those. A couple of years later, David and I were in London at the same time. We caught up at Whiskey Live, and just kind of stayed in touch around the place. And then he emailed me once and said, I'm coming to Hong Kong. He said, do you reckon you got a couple of whiskey lovers that we could maybe get together and have a little bit of a tasting? And not hard to get a bunch of people together, try some new whiskey. So we did, and held it at a great little bar here called Tiffany's. And and he held the very first international Starwood tasting, and some cool stuff in the lineup. We had there was a Louis Bar release, and Project X, and a whole, I think Project X was on there. Maybe it was before then. Anyway, a whole bunch of cool stuff. And we just kind of basically stayed in touch since then. Either when I was in Melbourne, or he or some of his team were over here in Hong Kong, and just been buying them ever since. And unfortunately, for the last 2 years, buying them and putting them into storage in Australia, where I haven't been able to taste anything. So I have no idea what any of the last 2 years worth of Starwood releases taste like, unfortunately, except for 148, which might be Starwood.
Which might be. We couldn't possibly say. We're going to be really coy about this. I want to show another photo from the bar. Actually, that's their new bar in Port Melbourne, which is really something to behold. It's I did ask once, are all the bottles actually filled with Starwood, or have you filled them with coloured water or tea? Otherwise, it's a lot of stock just sitting on the bar. And they said, they turned around. There was a bar manager at the time, turned around and looked at it and said, "Oh, that is all real Starwood, but no one's ever asked that before. And now I'm wondering how much stock is tied up on the back of the bar here." I thought, well, it's an afterthought, I guess. But there it is. And that was sort of the growth of this distillery and their popularity. It made sense for us to work with these guys on a few levels for the SMWS. One was availability and quality of spirit, really. That's the first sort of hallmark. what we tasted was incredible and was actually quite different from some of their core range, if you like. And the second reason was it made sense because we've got a relationship with them. We've been doing, like I said at the start, our Christmas parties and our events with them. And I should also mention at this point that Martin from Time For Whisky has written an article in our upcoming October out term, which you'll be able to read, and we've included some fantastic historical photos of, I guess, your historical journey with this distillery, which is great. It's a personal story that connects with us and connects with our members about the sort of the first days, as we even said, like just that discovering that Essendon site, or rushing out to buy a bottle because there's this quite frankly dorky presentation at the back of a bottle shop that you go, okay, like this, and how far the whiskey world has changed in some ways. Someone's even written here, love the SMWS parties at Starwood. Yeah, they've been great. They've been part of our sort of our fabric, if you like, our whiskey fabric at the society, and we love hosting them. Excuse me. We're going to have a taste of this whiskey in a second, but I also want to run through some of the sort of, I guess, nuts and bolts of it in some ways as well. Here's a photo. That's my outstretched arm there, waiting for my next dram. That is a photo with the production team at Starwood Distillery. There's Carly on the far right. That's Jared on the far left. Those two especially were extremely instrumental in the cask selection and process of picking out these first casks with us. This wasn't a case, it never is, of course, with us, but this wasn't a case of, what's available, what can we take, what can we get our hands on? This was a case of, hey, what do you want? Let's go through the warehouse and pick out some casks and draw some samples. And this one that we bottled for 148.1 just it really sung to us. There's a certain sort of relaxed, I guess, stately nature to it, which we written in the tasting notes. I might pour mine now, Martin, if you want to give it a bit of time in the glass at all. I'm just going to pour just a dribble into this glass here. I've got the real size bottle here. Martin's going to have to make do with the sample for now, but I'm holding it here. You've seen it here first. There it is. Oh, still trying to focus on my face, that camera. So there we go. A pair for everyone, 148.1. There's a few little sort of quirks about this bottling that I want to go into as well, which I'll go into in just a second. So, like I said, here we are with the warehouse team, and we call them the downstream team, if you like, the casking team, where we're picking out some casks. Truly a marvelous. It took us 2 or 2.5 days, a good 8-9 hours each day of just picking out cask samples, picking out things. What do you recommend? What works? Racks and racks of casks. Every single cask is utterly unique, so we need to make sure what we're picking is rather special. Then, of course, fast forward about 9 months or so. This is the first photo of bottling day. There's the first 148s being filled. I like showing some of the sort of behind the scenes production photos of things that happened. They're nerdy to me, and some people will appreciate them. Then there's the deep, rich, and dried fruits flavor cap being placed on the top of each bottle, ready for heat shrinking. And then the first label being applied to the first bottle, which is rather cool. Them lining it up, working out spacing, all the exacting specifications and measurements of where the label should sit on each society bottle, which you don't think about these things when you're enjoying a bottle of society whiskey. You don't think about, well, it has to be exactly 10 millimeters beneath the monogram and this and that. But they're really important brand specifications for us. And then some QA going on here. I'm checking out the number of times they unpeeled a front or back label for the first sort of 12, 15 bottles, not entirely straight or not entirely in the right spot. And then you have to sort of peel off the old label and clean down the bottle again and start again. It took a fair bit of wrangling. And then there's Carly and Jared in full flight on bottling day. They were just as excited as I was to see this come to light. That's them hard at work. If you hold a hammer or a clipboard in any capacity, you are working. That's a rule of thumb. If you're in an office and you need sort of to work out how to take some time off, just carry a clipboard. And there it is. There's the actual cask. I think this is rather cool that we can see the actual cask from this 148.1. It is a bit of an older one for them. And the date on the bottle is not exactly accurate in that we've said this is a 6-year-old whiskey. It's not. It's a 7-year-old. We sort of wouldn't say made that mistake, but we printed the labels and the date ticked over to 7. And we're sort of like, well, labels are printed. It's a 6 and a bit years now. And then it's suddenly Sam, the production manager, informed me that, yeah, sorry, folks. It's actually now what do you call it? It's now a 7-year-old, and we're like, oh well, it says 6 on the label. It's a 7, in fact, but that's okay. It tastes really good. And there, of course, again, another label being applied. I think it was just a beautiful moment for me. I've got to say, for me, it's one of those things that it's not real until you're seeing the labels go on. It's not a real release yet. It's still spirit in a cask, and seeing it going literally from cask through a tube into bottling line is quite remarkable, and it's quite exciting. Sush saying he's loving the pictures and the stories. Of course, the pictures and the story. I think about those things. And how many bottles for Australian release? We're sending, I think, 6 or 7 cases or so. So 36 bottles are going over to the UK. So the UK members have a bit of a stab at it, which for the size of the UK membership, 36 bottles is a whiff of an oily rag compared to the cask sizes allocations they're used to getting. So it's a bit of a sort of shoes on the other foot. So when they send us 36 bottles of a Scotch whiskey in Australia, it's kind of like that works for us, but you know what I mean. Anyway, it's almost like the complete reverse of where we came from. As for so we'll have we've got 210 bottles yielded entirely from the cask, and it's a deep, rich, and dried fruits. It's a 7-year-old. It's not 6. It does not that makes a huge difference, but it's just for nitpicking. And the date ticked over from bottling date. We postponed a bottling date, so it actually became a little bit older. Anyway, I poured a dram in my glass. It's got a lovely hue to it, or as some members like to often say, "Look at the color." And so I'm looking at it, and I'm having a nose. Now, I know this whiskey well. I've tasted it on tasting panel, local panel with Andrew. I've tasted it a number of times since being bottled. I'm well accustomed to it, but every time I come back to this one, it always has something different to tell me. Now, Martin, you tasted this, and you taste a lot of whiskeys. I mean, I do as well, but I mean, you taste, let's say, a far broader cross-section of bottlers these days than I do. So you tasted this, and you said it was quite. There was a word you used. I think it was quite relaxed compared to especially some Apera whiskies.
Yeah. No, I mean, I found it fascinating because you definitely, like, it lets you know it's a Starwood. It's definitely a Starwood, but it's got this, I'd say, almost complexity and almost this kind of elegance that you don't always get on Starwood. Not to say that they're not great whiskeys. They are. They're absolutely delicious. But it's a step above. And I was actually curious. Yeah, did you, like you said, you tasted a lot of casks? You spent a lot of time there. Was this the one standout, or was there, like, were you tossing up between a couple for that 0.1?
For the .1, actually, yeah. Well, there was one other cask, of which I probably shouldn't say too much about, but there was one other cask that was actually a 10 and a half year oldish cask, and it was a refill, and it was sublime stuff. And it was actually, believe it or not, it was actually Mark Gillespie from Whiskey Cast who alerted me to that very cask, who said to me, because he connection. Yeah, he visited the distillery and said, he tasted this 10-year-old, well, at the time 9-year-old refill, and he said it was stunning. He said it was one of the best Australian whiskies he'd ever had. And I said, okay, I've got to try and get that cask. And so I sort of had a chat with them about it. But they've kind of, they were not reluctant to let it go, but it's sort of like one of those things like, well, let's start with something that we can, because it's a 10-year-old refill is also not, it's not inexpensive. It's something that needs, but it's also something that we might come back to it, but it may have been earmarked for something else. So we'll have to see. It's a bit of a juggling game with casks, but this one I think was much more suited to the .1. We might see something a little bit different later down the track. In fact, we might see a very different .2. But hashtag team refill. I love hashtag team refill all the way. Team refill. Big fan of refills. We all are. If you're a society member, you've got to be a fan of good refills. There's a certain magic to refill whiskey, which I won't get on my soapbox about, but it's good fun. Let's have a taste of this. Now it's sitting at 58.3. You can do the math. Like, it was distilled 27th of November 2013, and it was bottled in March this year. So if you work your way backwards, it's 7 years. 7.3 years. There we go.
It's really interesting. I've been getting this kind of like nuttiness, this almost like herbaceousness, and now I'm getting some more of the fruit coming through, all just on the nose.
The fruit is there on the nose, isn't it? It's very It's a fun nose, isn't it? Like it is. It's really good. It instantly reminds me. Actually, what it reminds me of, quite honestly, I remember at the distillery. I don't know if I'm even allowed to tell this story. Back in like 2014, I visited. It was one of my last visits to the Essendon site, and I was at the distillery. And before I went, I was speaking to David on email or phone or whatever, and he said, "Oh, make sure I give you a bottle of something special. Just like on the day, I've got something really special you want to take with you." I'm like, "Oh, great." And he finishes the tour. It's like in 2014, and he's showing me what had happened in the last 3 years since I last visited or something. And he's showing me around and going, and then he finishes the tour and says, "Oh, all right, well, it's great. Like, so, it's like 5 or 6 of us." And he goes, "This is great. Like, just thanks everyone for coming along and see you later." And we sort of went, "Oh, you mentioned something like you wanted to give us a sample or a bottle of something special." And he goes, "Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, come with me." And we go over to the actual Solera, of which the Solera release was based on. And he just pours bottles off the Solera, straight off the spigot of the Solera. So it's essentially their Solera a para release, like a para whiskey release, but straight off the Solera, so it cask strength. And he just pops a normal Starwood cork in it and doesn't even put a label on, just puts a swing tag on it. And there was 700 mils. So he goes, "Oh, I think it's probably like, it's 58, 59% or something." Yep, there you go. I don't know. And it's like, and gave it to me, and he's like, as he's passing it to me, he sort of pauses for a second. He goes, "Yeah, just don't tell Ian." Okay, bye. And so Ian, the production manager at the time, who was managing all the fractions of all the Solera volume and everything. So it kind of reminds me of that. But my long story is that was a lovely release, being able to taste the Solera straight off the Solera, like cask strength Solera. And this kind of reminds me of that, albeit a single cask sort of layout. But I know what you're feeding me at fruits. I've let it sit in the glass for a while now, and the fruits are just bouncing out, aren't they?
Now I'm getting a little bit of the smoke coming through now, like that kind of nutty smoke that follows. But it just
that hazelnut, kind of like almost like smoky Nutella.
That's what I mean. It's like when I was tasting it for the article, I sat with it for a good 20, 25 minutes, I think, before I tasted it, because it's just one of those whiskeys that just evolves, which you expect when you're drinking some pretty old well matured Scotch, but it's incredible from a 7-year-old Starwood.
6 on the bottle, 7 in the glass.
It's a bonus here.
Yeah, you got a bonus here, no extra charge. So we're going to I've added a few drops of water to mine. I want to see how this reacts with water. Again, I've tasted it with and without water a few times, but that nose just then, undiluted, was very different from last time I nosed it.
I'm going to do the same, actually.
I think it holds water well on the nose, but it doesn't need it. It works well, but
yeah. No, I remember I tried it before, and it took it fine, but it wasn't. There's whiskeys where you get an obvious difference. This definitely needs water, or this definitely shouldn't have water, and it's not one of those. It copes.
Question for you, as someone who writes a lot about whiskey as well, and especially say you do a lot of whiskey reviews, you taste a lot of whiskeys and say, give your thoughts and whatnot. Just as almost like a quick fire, like, are you for or against doing a scoring system yourself, or you just generally like to write sort of like tasting notes and thoughts?
Yeah, controversial topic. So I do use a scoring system, but my view on scoring is all that does is tell you how I rated that whiskey compared to how I rated another whiskey, because that's the only point of reference, right? It's just me, because my 91 might be your 88, right? So I think scores are complete BS, except for comparing what the same person thinks of of 2 different whiskeys.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't, I've had times when people have gone, "Oh, like Time For Whisky gave it a 91. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. That just means I liked it more than something I rated 88.
Yeah. Question here, which he says to me, but Darren might be asking both of us here. Has the flavor altered much from your initial cask tastings to how it is in the bottle today? That's a really good question. You do actually, there is differences. There absolutely is. And this is why it is actually quite a, I guess I'm going to say without sounding too big about it, but like it is a bit of a honed skill as in what you taste from a cask as a cask sample is obviously not going to be the full representation of how it ends up in the bottle. I'm reminded of one of my favorite examples of that is what I call the Elvis Presley effect. Now, when Elvis Presley recorded his albums, he'd always ask the masterer, the guy mastering his records, to put them onto, can you please put it onto a cassette tape for me? And the guy doing mastering would say, oh, it's going to ruin the sound. It doesn't sound as good as it does on LP. And he'd say, no, put it onto a cassette tape for me, and then I'm going to go listen to it in my car. And this is like this, it was crucial because he worked out that most people are going to be listening to Elvis on a cassette in their car. And that's the same thing with whiskey. You taste whiskey straight from a cask, especially if you're tasting it straight from a cask at a distillery. That makes almost no context of the end product, in my opinion. That's as Martin knows. I mean, you taste whiskey. You taste whiskey even from a bottle within a distillery. There's a romance. There's a sort of like the flowers are out and the language is out and you're having a marvelous time. And there's a head distiller telling you about the craftsmanship or the small batch or whatever wording they like to use. And then you take this bottle home that you got all excited about and you pour a glass like 3 or 4 days later and you go, this is a bit boring. Sort of there's that romance sort of dies down a bit. So you have to sort of approach the same thing, I think, with casks to bottles, in that you can get wrapped up in some really exciting and flowery tasting notes. And it's sometimes good to come back and sort of rewind and go, oh, okay, like how does it taste at home? How does it taste on a Wednesday night out of a tumbler? And I think, out of like non-even nosing glassware, and just saying, how would because we don't discriminate how you enjoy this. Like if you want to smash it into a cocktail, if you want to have it in a rocks glass, if you want to have it out of a Bormioli tulip, however you want to enjoy it is entirely your choice. But I think it's good to test it a few different ways in different contexts. And Andrew and I did that a few times for this release. What are your thoughts on that question, Martin?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think first of all, spot on about the everything tastes better in its birthplace, right? Like not just whiskey, but the romance and the magic, even if you're conscious of it, is hard to ignore. But look, I agree.
Fresh salmon tastes best at the salmon farm.
Yeah. I think whiskey's always evolving, and even in the bottle, right? Like over the course of a bottle's life, as you get a bit of oxidation and a bit of air in there. I find some bottles will particularly change. In fact, that one, not to pick a society bottle, but actually this is one more than any other that I've found has changed hugely.
I'll bring you up on
10.188.
Oh yeah,
Ash bottling.
Yes.
Not much left now, but when I first opened it, I'll be honest, I wasn't a huge fan. I liked it, but it wasn't as good as everyone had said. And then as the level went down, I started saying, oh, yeah, right. Okay, here we go. Now I'm seeing what everyone was saying. And I mean, it's 62.5%. So I think just, with that one, the air just helped a little bit. But I think, there's a lot of things that change how you perceive, whiskey and, more than just the liquid itself.
Did you read some bloggers 91 out of 100 on it? Did you? And that No,
I think I did. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, as well with whiskey is that, as you said before, like some whiskeys, and I'd argue a lot, really improved with a bit of open time in the bottle, and they mellow out a bit, and I say that in a good way. Like they become a bit more sort of like, now it's telling the full story. It's sort of opened up a bit more. The air has actually improved it. I'd argue peated whiskey doesn't really benefit from that too much. That often falls off a cliff. Like, I mean, talking like properly heavily peated, not like a sherried 10, like unpeated sherried 10, like that one was. But yeah, that was that new acquaintance was. I think it was a spectacular drop, and I've come back to it a few times myself.
Yeah, it was definitely. I've only ever had one bottle completely fall off a cliff after about 9 months or so. And it was just an OB Shivers 18 many, many years ago. And I had it on the shelf and I went back to it. It was like drinking Shivers flavored water. It was just terrible. But, 40%, as a starting point. So, but of just seeing how whiskies evolve in the bottle.
Yeah, fantastic. How's your 148.1 holding up with that water?
Well, I'm just very sad because that's all I have left, and until I can come back to Australia, that's all I will ever have. So, at least I got a little bit of 148.2 left in the sample. If we can, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that.
We'll save that for a future stream, because we're not hiding the fact that there's a 148.2, but I think the focus really is about the .1 for now, and seeing where we are. Alex says,
"Hey, Alex, how you going?"
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, this is exciting, because this is a moment for us to showcase Australian whiskey in a new light, to say that we think this distillery is doing remarkable stuff, and for us to pick up a few casks and have a bit of fun. And this is I guess the start of this. Well, not the start. Midway through our relationship with these guys already, after years of events and good times. I won't hold you up for too much longer, Martin. I'm sure you've got a long night ahead.
No.
But I really appreciate you coming on. I'm really looking forward to members reading your full write-up in Outturn. And I'm glad we got an opportunity to sit and have a dram and for us to taste through some of the story of this special whiskey.
No, mate, likewise. Thanks so much for the opportunity and, for writing the article and all the rest of it. It's really good to stay connected to the Australian whiskey scene in this way without actually physically being there. So, mate, really appreciate it. And great to see you and everyone on the chat.
Thank you, everyone on the chat. 148.1, a para for everyone, a 7-year-old with a 6-year-old sticker. Deep, rich, and dried fruits, single cask strength whiskey, approved by the SMWS tasting panel, both locally and internationally, and then shared with members around the world. Will be in our October Outturn, which is the 1st, I think, Friday the 1st. I think I put that up on the caption. There's the caption. Is in Friday the 1st of October in Outturn. And Outturn is only available to members. If you are not a member yet, first question is, why not? Even Martin's been a member for almost 10 years. I'm going to say almost 10. You know what? It's probably like 8.
Yeah, no, it's 9. Close.
Okay, 9. There you go. There you go. Sorry. But you see, this is exciting, because if you're not, use the code APERA, APERA, for $30 off any membership type. Always welcome to join the society. Ali Barner, great to see you. Suj Pillai, keen as mustard, he says. Keen as mustard. That's one of my favorite quotes. I just want a mustard colored jacket, actually. That'd be good. That'd be good fun. And now I'm just talking nonsense. But really appreciate Martin Eber from Time For Whisky coming on. Check out timeforwhisky.com. Absolutely great resource. It's in my constantly, I have at least 5 whiskey sites that I use as a resource, and his is definitely in those 5, which I love.
Very kind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you, everyone, tuning in, and we'll see you all. We'll see you all soon. Yeah.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks.
Stay safe.